Every Tuesday at 6:30 in the evening, my son called me on the dot, and he hadn't missed a single one in 6 years. So when the phone stayed quiet that night, I felt it in my chest before I let myself think it in words. My wife glanced up from her crossword and said, "He's probably just stuck in traffic, honey." I called anyway. It rang 4 times and dropped into voicemail. I called his wife next. She picked up on the second ring. Too fast, too smooth. "He's out with some guys from work," she said. "Can I talk to him for a second?" I asked. There was a pause, just a beat too long before she answered. "He stepped out. I'll have him call you back." That was when I went and got my truck keys off the hook by the door. If this story is already sitting heavy on you, I'm glad you're here with me. Before we go any further, tell me down in the comments what town you're watching from tonight. I like knowing how far these stories travel to reach somebody, and I'll say this now so it's said. Some names and details in this story have been changed, but the heart of it is true, and it's a heart I hope you'll carry with you a little while after the video ends. My name is Walter Pruitt. I'm 68 years old, and for 38 years I worked as an electrician, mostly commercial jobs, wiring up strip malls and warehouses and the occasional church. I retired 4 years ago with bad knees, a good pension, and a habit I never managed to shake. I still read a room like I'm looking for a short circuit. Old wiring leaves a smell. A panel that's been overloaded leaves a certain kind of scorch mark, faint, almost invisible, if you know where to look. 38 years of that kind of looking doesn't turn off just because you hang up your tool belt. My wife's name is Doreen. She's 64. She taught second grade for 3 decades before she retired, and she still corrects grammar out loud when the television's on, which drives me half crazy and which I would not trade for anything in this world. We live in a brick ranch house on Larkspur Lane in a town called Millbrook, about 40 minutes outside of Dayton, Ohio. We raised one son in that house, Ethan Pruitt, 33 years old now, an accountant, married 5 years to a woman named Vanessa. They live over in a newer subdivision on the other side of town, one of those developments where all the houses look like cousins of each other, vinyl siding and 2-car garages, and a strip of new sod out front that hasn't quite taken root yet. Ethan and Vanessa don't have kids of their own, but Vanessa has a daughter from a previous relationship, Millie. She's 8 years old, and from the day Ethan married her mother, that little girl called him Dad, and he never once corrected her. He used to tell me, "Blood's not the only thing that makes a father, Pop." I believed him. I still do. Every Tuesday evening, ever since he moved out of our house at 22, Ethan called. Rain or shine, busy season at the accounting firm or slow season, sick with the flu or feeling fine. 6:30 came around and my phone lit up with his name. Sometimes it was 5 minutes of talk about nothing, the Reds' bullpen, a leak under his kitchen sink he wanted my opinion on, whether he should refinance the house. Sometimes Millie would grab the phone and tell me about a book report or a spelling bee she'd almost won. It had become the spine of my week without my ever noticing it was holding anything up until the week it didn't. That particular Tuesday had started like any other. Doreen had a pork loin in the oven, and the whole house smelled like rosemary and garlic. And I was in my recliner with the Reds game on low, and she kept walking past me to check the oven, patting my shoulder each time the way she's done for 41 years of marriage. "Ethan's going to tell us about the new roof," she said from the kitchen. "Millie's been asking if she can pick the shingle color." I laughed and said something about hoping the kid didn't pick purple. And Doreen laughed too, and 6:30 came, and the phone sat dark on the arm of my chair. By 7, I'd told myself it was nothing. By 7:15, I'd called twice more and gotten voicemail both times. By 7:30, I'd called Vanessa and gotten that too smooth answer that he's out with the guys that didn't sit right in my stomach the way a true thing sits. Vanessa is a pleasant woman, always has been, quick with a compliment, quick with a laugh at the right moment in a conversation. But I've wired enough houses to know that a wall that looks smooth sometimes has rot behind it, and something about her voice that night had the texture of a wall like that. Doreen turned the oven off without me asking her to. She stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel twisted in both hands and said, "Walter, go." I didn't need telling twice. The drive to their subdivision usually took me 22 minutes. I made it in 16, and I don't remember much of the road, just the porch light of their house coming up out of the dark like something I'd been driving toward my whole life without knowing it. The house was dark, Not just unlit dark in a way that a house gets when nobody's touched a switch in a while, when the only light left is whatever's bleeding in from the street lamp at the curb. I sat in the truck for a second longer than I needed to, and then I got out and walked up the driveway. Ethan's sedan was in the garage. I could see it through the little window in the side door. Dark blue, parked crooked, the way he never parked it. Vanessa's SUV was gone. I stood on the front step and knocked again, and nobody came. I still had the spare key. Ethan had given it to me 2 winters back after a bad ice storm knocked their power out for 3 days, and Vanessa had been out of town. He'd pressed it into my hand at Sunday dinner and said, "Just in case, Pop, you never know with this weather." I'd put it on my ring that same night and never taken it off, the way you keep a fire extinguisher you hope you'll never need. The key slid into the deadbolt clean and turned easy, and the door swung open onto a smell that hit me before anything else did: stale air. A house shut up tight with the heat running too high, and underneath that, the sour smell of a trash can that hadn't been emptied in days. The living room looked ordinary at first pass. Couch, coffee table, Millie's drawings taped up on the refrigerator I could see through the kitchen pass-through. But 38 years of walking into other people's houses teaches you what straightened in a hurry looks like. And this living room had that look. The throw pillows lined up too square, the remote controls stacked in a neat little tower, instead of scattered the way they always were on our own coffee table at home. There was a single hair elastic, purple, lying on the carpet near the base of the couch, too far from anywhere it would have naturally rolled to. I moved through to the kitchen. 2 days of dishes, maybe 3, crusted over in the sink. The counters had been wiped, but wiped fast. There was a smear of something dried and dark in the corner by the stove that whoever cleaned had missed. I opened the refrigerator out of some instinct I couldn't have explained to you even now. Beer, a takeout container of Chinese food gone waxy at the edges, a carton of orange juice 2 days past its date, no juice boxes, no string cheese, no little bags of grapes with a name written on them in a mother's handwriting. Nothing in that refrigerator belonged to an 8-year-old girl, and that absence sat in my chest heavier than anything I'd have found there. I stood in the middle of that kitchen, with the refrigerator humming behind me, and something cold settling into my stomach. And then, out of habit more than anything, my eyes dropped to the floor near the water heater closet, where I could see the edge of the home's electrical panel through a half-open door. I don't know why I walked toward it. Call it 38 years of a body doing what it's trained to do before the mind catches up. The panel door was ajar. Someone had been in it recently. You could see fresh fingerprints in the light dust on the cover, and one of the breaker switches, the one labeled in faded marker BSMT, was flipped to off. Every other breaker in that panel was on. I stood there looking at that single dead switch and felt something in me go very still and very cold, the way it used to go still on a job site when I smelled a wire that had been run wrong. Someone had cut the power to the basement on purpose. That's when I heard it, a sound low and faint, coming up through the floor near my feet. Not through the air, but through the house itself, the way sound travels through joists and studs if you know how to listen for it. Not the furnace, not the ice maker. Something with a rhythm to it, starting and stopping, deliberate in a way that plumbing and appliances never are. I followed the sound to a door at the end of the hallway past the kitchen, a door I remembered from helping Ethan run a new circuit down to that basement 2 summers back for his workshop. It was painted the same flat white as the wall around it, easy to miss if you didn't know it was there. It had a padlock on it now, not the simple slide bolt I remembered installing a latch for, a heavy combination padlock, brand new, no rust on the shackle, the kind you buy off a pegboard at a hardware store for $12. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. I put my palm flat against that door. The paint was cool under my hand. I leaned my ear against it and closed my eyes and made myself filter out the refrigerator hum and the tick of the cooling furnace, and listened the way you listen for a short in a wall, when everything looks fine on the surface, and you know it isn't. And under all of it, I heard breathing. Slow, shallow, but breathing. My throat locked up so hard I couldn't get a word out for a second. I swallowed twice and knocked, soft, with 2 knuckles. "Ethan." My voice came out cracked, barely above a whisper. "Ethan, it's Dad." Nothing. Then a sharp intake of breath from the other side. the sound of someone who'd been holding perfectly still for a long time and just had that stillness broken open. And then I remembered something I hadn't thought of in 25 years. When Ethan was small, 6 or 7, we used to play a game in the evenings before bed, hide and seek through the house. And he was small enough back then to fold himself into the strangest places behind the water heater, under the stairs, wedged into the linen closet between towels. When I got close to finding him, he never gave himself away by moving or making noise. He'd knock. 3 slow knocks on whatever was nearest to him. Wood, drywall, the leg of a table. It was our signal. It meant, "I'm here, Dad. You're getting warm. Keep going." I raised my fist and knocked 3 times on that basement door. Slow. A pause after each one. 5 seconds went by that felt longer than any 5 seconds I have lived through in 68 years on this earth. Then, from the other side of that door, 3 knocks came back. Slow. The same pause between each one. I grabbed the padlock in both hands and pulled on it with everything I had, and it didn't give an inch good hardware. A solid shackle, built to hold. My hands were shaking so bad I had to brace them against the doorframe, and the shaking made me angrier than I think I have ever been in my life, because I needed those hands to work right now, and they weren't listening to me. "Ethan." I pressed my mouth close to the crack of the door. "I hear you. I'm right here. I'm going to get this door open. You understand me? I am not leaving this house without you." From the other side, muffled, hoarse, cracked clean in half on its way out of whoever was saying it, came one word. "Dad." Not Ethan's voice, Vanessa's. I want to tell you my mind went 100 places in that half-second relief that it wasn't my son locked behind that door. A stab of something colder, wondering where in God's name my son actually was. And underneath all of it, a bone-deep fear for a woman I'd hugged at Thanksgiving dinner every year for 5 years running. I didn't have time to sort through any of it. I was already moving. My toolbox lived behind the bench seat of my truck the way it had for 38 years, and I got the door open so hard it bounced on its hinge, dragged the box out onto the driveway, and flipped the latches with hands that still hadn't stopped shaking. 18-inch bolt cutters, good steel, bought in 1989, and never once let me down. I ran back inside with them and set the jaws around that shackle and put my whole body weight into the handles, and it took 3 tries before the steel gave with a crack that echoed through that quiet house like a gunshot. The door swung open onto a set of stairs going down into dark, and Vanessa was at the bottom of them, sitting on the concrete floor with her back against the wall, wrists zip-tied in front of her, a strip of duct tape hanging loose from one side of her mouth, where she must have worked it loose enough to breathe and to knock. Her face was streaked and swollen, one eye bruised dark, but she was alive. And when she saw me at the top of those stairs, she made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. Something between a sob and a laugh. Pure relief, breaking a person open. I got down those stairs faster than a 68-year-old man with bad knees has any business moving. And I got the zip tie cut with my utility knife. And I pulled that girl, because that's what she was to me in that moment. A girl, my son's wife, someone's daughter into my arms. And she shook against my chest like something coming apart at the seams. "Millie," she said into my shirt, over and over, before I could even ask. "Millie. Is Millie okay? Where's Millie?" "I don't know yet," I told her, keeping my voice as level as I could get it to go. "I'm going to find her right now. I need you to breathe for me. Can you do that?" She nodded against my chest, and I eased her up the stairs with one arm around her and got her settled on the couch in the living room, and pulled my phone out and dialed 911 with fingers that still weren't fully steady. 911, what's your emergency? I need police and an ambulance at 1442 Cardinal Ridge Court in Millbrook, I said. I have an adult female here, assaulted and restrained, and I have a missing 8-year-old child I believe is somewhere in this house. The dispatcher's voice stayed calm and even, the way they're trained to, and she kept me on the line while I moved, phone wedged against my shoulder, calling Millie's name through every room of that house, up the stairs, down the hall, into a bedroom with butterfly decals on the wall and a bedspread patterned with cartoon foxes. I heard it before I saw anything. A small, thin sound, more breath than voice, coming from under that bed. I got down on my knees on that carpet, my knees screaming at me the whole way down, and lifted the edge of that bedspread. And there she was, Millie, curled up small in the shadow of the bed frame, knees to her chest, eyes huge and wet and fixed on my face like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "Grandpa Walt?" "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, and my voice broke clean in half saying it. "I'm right here. You're safe now. I've got you." She came out from under that bed and into my arms so fast and so hard she nearly knocked me backward, and I held on to her the way you hold something you were half certain you'd never get to hold again. She was shaking, and her cheeks were streaked dry with old tears, and there was a smudge of peanut butter on her chin from some earlier attempt to feed herself in the dark, and she was, in that moment, the single most beautiful thing I believe I have ever laid eyes on in 68 years of living. Then she pulled back just far enough to shove something at me, pressed flat against my chest with both small hands. A phone. Not hers, an old one. A hand-me-down with a cracked corner on the screen and a case covered in stickers, unicorns and rainbows, and one that read, "Future Scientist" in glittery letters. "I recorded it, Grandpa." Her voice came out raw, barely there. I didn't know what else to do. I hid it under my pillow first, and then I brought it under the bed with me, and I just let it record everything. I thought somebody should know what happened. I looked down at that cracked screen. A single audio file, 51 minutes long, time-stamped from 2 nights before. "Do you have any idea?" I said, cupping her face in both my hands, dirt and tear streaks and peanut butter and all. "How smart you are." She let out a wet, exhausted laugh that sounded, for just a second, exactly like her stepfather, laughing as a boy. And it near about undid me standing right there on that carpet. "Mom says I get it from you and Dad both," she said. "Where's your dad?" I made myself ask it gently, though everything in me wanted to shout it. Her face went tight and scared again. "The bad man made him leave. He said if Dad didn't go get money from somewhere, he was going to hurt me and Mom worse. Dad didn't want to go. He was crying when he left. I heard him. I didn't understand all of it yet, wouldn't understand the full shape of it for another hour, until the police arrived and Vanessa, wrapped in a blanket on her own couch with an EMT checking the bruise along her cheekbone, told the officers in a shaking voice about a man named Curtis Bowles, a debt Ethan hadn't told any of us about, a gambling habit that had gotten away from him over the better part of a year, and a visit 2 nights before from a man collecting on it who hadn't liked the answer he got. Ethan had been sent out, under threat, to find money that didn't exist, while Vanessa and Millie were left locked in that house as insurance that he'd come back. He did come back, 4 hours after I found Millie under that bed, walking up his own driveway, gray-faced and empty-handed, having spent half the night driving from one closed bank branch and one unanswering friend to the next, having finally called the police himself from a gas station parking lot when he couldn't raise anyone at the house, and his own phone had been taken from him by the man who'd threatened him. There's a lot more to that night than I can lay out for you here. Statements taken. A man named Curtis Bowles arrested 2 towns over before sunrise, thanks in no small part to 51 minutes of audio recorded by an 8-year-old hiding under her own bed. A hospital visit for Vanessa that turned out, thank God, to be for bruising and dehydration and nothing worse. Ethan didn't sleep that whole first night. Sat up in the hospital waiting room with Millie asleep against his shoulder and his head in his hands, and when I sat down next to him he looked at me and said, "I should have told you, Pop. I should have told somebody. I thought I could fix it myself before it touched them." "That's the whole trouble with pride," I told him. "It waits until it's too late to ask for help, and then it's not your pride that pays for it." He didn't have an answer for that. He just nodded and put his head back down, and I sat with him until the sun came up. It's been 4 months now. Ethan's in a debt counseling program through the credit union, going every week, and he told me last Tuesday on the phone, at 6:30, right on schedule. The call restored that for the first time in over a year he'd slept a full night without waking up doing math in his head. Vanessa's doing better. Some days are harder than others. There's a flinch in her now when a door closes too loud that wasn't there before, and I don't imagine that goes away on any set schedule. She started seeing someone twice a week to talk it through, and I think that was the smartest thing she's done in all of this. Smarter than anything I managed. Millie still sleeps with a small flashlight on her nightstand, and some nights she still asks Vanessa to check under the bed before she'll close her eyes, and Vanessa checks every single time without a word of complaint, because that's what you do for a child who taught herself, in the space of one terrible night, that the world could turn dangerous behind an ordinary bedroom door. People ask me sometimes what I took away from all of it, from the longest night of my using them to 50. Padlock in a basement and 51 minutes on a cracked phone screen under a little girl's bed. Here's what I know now that I didn't know before that Tuesday. I used to believe that respecting my son's privacy meant staying out of his business entirely, that a good father lets his grown children handle their own troubles without a lot of prying. I don't believe that anymore, not in the same simple way. There's a difference between giving somebody room to breathe and leaving them alone in the dark to drown quietly so as not to trouble anybody. I'd noticed things in the months before that night. Ethan, a little thinner, a little quieter at Sunday dinner, always finding some reason to change the subject when money came up, and I'd told myself it wasn't my place to push. I was wrong. It was exactly my place. If something in your gut is telling you a person you love is carrying more than they're letting on, ask them. Ask them plainly, and ask them again if the first answer doesn't sit right. Don't wait for a Tuesday phone call that never comes to tell you what you already half knew. Later has a bad habit of turning into too late before you ever see it coming. I believe there was a reason I still had that spare key on my ring 2 winters after an ice storm that had long since passed. I'm not a man who talks easy about faith. Never have been. But I believe some doors are meant to be opened by the person who happens to be holding the right key at the right hour. And I believe an 8-year-old girl, hiding under a bed with a phone pressed to her chest, was owed that much by whatever runs this world. If this story found something in you tonight, I'd be grateful if you left a word down in the comments about what stayed with you longest. Tell somebody about it if you think they need to hear it. You never know who's sitting quiet with a worry they haven't said out loud to a soul. And if these stories mean something to you, stick around for the next one. I've got more to tell, and I'd like the company. Thank you for staying with me clear through to the end of this one. I mean that. I'll see you next time.